Hello, everyone. So, I haven't done a recording for this past month. Basically, I've been out traveling a lot, and as some of you know, I'm an associate professor, so it's a wind down of the semester. So, I've been a little busy, but got back from the ASHP mid-year, which was pretty cool. Got to meet a lot of people, but it's a conversation for another time. I think I'll go into detail. And then, gave a talk about digital health and medication adherence, which I thought went pretty well. I was happy with that. And had some other business meetings to attend to, so haven't been doing my weekly updates on digital health stuff as much as I like. In the event, what I thought I'd do was go over a bunch of articles that have come out and recap some things that I thought might be interesting if you're looking for some reading material for this coming year, wrapping up. One is the Digital Health Innovation Action Plan from the U.S. FDA. This is a pretty short document, but I think it's really cool to see what they've come up with in terms what they've done for digital health, along with that their discussion in terms of what they want to do for the upcoming year. And I think it comes down for a lot. I mean, this document might be really good for companies that are looking to get into the digital health space. So I'd highly recommend if you're in that to read this. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty cool item to look at. Next is a bunch of little news articles that come up, and Moby Health News is a great resource. I highly recommend them if you're interested in digital health. They do have a lot of stuff from medicine overall, but for pharmacy, you see a lot of things they talk about. So I stick usually to the pharmacy stuff, as you can probably guess. But in this case, one was about Adhere Tech, and what was really cool was seeing the fact that they're having so many people that they're really leveraging and getting involved with. Now, if you've watched my work in the past, I've kind of been a little sour about smart pill bottles, but that's basically because a lot of studies we've had published this far haven't been that very positive. So Adhere Tech, I think, has been doing some good work, and I think if they get some good literature published here lately, soon, we'll probably, kind of reinvigorate this space. And I think that's been what's been missing from recent studies that have been coming out, which I think the methodology was questionable in terms of why we saw such negative results. One example would be the Heartstrong study. If you go on my blog, you'll see I've written in depth about that one. And in any event, I think it's going to be interesting to see what Adhere Tech does here in the next year in terms of the partnerships are really forming, and along with that, kind of what results they may put out here soon. So, I mean, that's what we're kind of with this company, but I think it's something that's really worth watching. Next, we have Pear. So Pear is a digital therapeutics company. So in digital health, you have digital therapeutics, which I've spoken about before in podcasts and such, and they're really prescribable products. So if we talk about pharmacy, we know about pharmacotherapeutics. Well, this is just digital therapeutics where you have a digital intervention that leads to some therapeutic benefit. And I don't think it's going to be long before we see these things integrated into guidelines and other resources like that. But the big issue is going to be, will the payers cover it? And then the other thing I'm really curious about is who's going to be a prescriber for it. I'm really championing the idea that pharmacists would be, but I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to really fight for at the end of the day. But in any event, this is, with Pear, they've had, with Sandoz, their products were being approved, and now we have another one with opioid use disorder that we're seeing just got approved as well. So I think this one's really interesting to read over if you're curious about how you can use an app to help out with opioid use. Next is Bennett. Now, if you've been watching this with the mobile health space, Bennett was a product that you would put on a bed and you would sleep on it, and what would happen is it would just track your movement. So instead of using a wearable device you put on your arm, like a Fitbit or something, that would track your movement and see how well you're sleeping, this one actually just laid on the bed. I never tried this product. I don't actually know anyone personally that did, but the thing that was cool about it was Apple was actually got involved with it, and they acquired it back in 2017. But the question that I have about it is I never really heard what they were doing with the brand. So this news that they're going to be relaunching it, so to say, I think is relatively cool, and we may see more promising information coming from them in the future. And keep in mind, Apple has been really gearing itself, I think, for the health space, because we saw now with their Apple Watch Series 4 They basically stuck on an EKG on it. I think they're seeing a lot of competition from the wearables market, so they're also trying to see where they can further develop other devices that fit into their brand, and this might be one of them. Next this is kind of cool. So this is Pops, and if you look at this image, what you can see is it's a device that fits on the back of your smartphone case, and it got clearance by the FDA, and what it does is that it's supposed to be able to track your sugar levels from it. So, we're in an era now where we're reaching continuous blood glucose monitoring, or CGM, and you see like the Freestyle Libre that you can put on your arm. You have devices coming out from Dexcom that you can pair and put onto your on your abdomen that sense in real time glucose, and that syncs to an app or to a mobile device if it's on your wrist, like an Apple Watch. But the fact that you put this on a back of a device is kind of cool, because we saw this stuff kind of disappear. Like, one company would have been IPG Star, which came out, I want to say, back in like 2012, 2013 era. And that one actually tethered either through the 30 pin on the old style iPhones, and when the 30 pin went away for the new charger, which now even USB-C for the newer devices coming out wireless, you kind of saw these companies have trouble. We've seen it with Kinza with their smart thermometers, where it actually stuck into a headphone jack, and then when the headphone jack went away from newer models, they kind of like, well, what do we do? So everything's kind of go to the Bluetooth model at this point in time in order to survive. I think Bluetooth is your number one thing you have to consider for wearables. Directly tethering to a device is kind of a huge limitation, especially with hardware changes over the years. Next is with Medicare. This one's been really, really big for me. Is I think we're going to see CMS really make a big push for CPT codes for remote patient monitoring, and this one I've been doing a lot of work into. Then what they did was they revised one code and they added 3 new codes on as well. And these 3 codes allow you to bill for setting up initial, for monitoring physiological data, and then using it for therapeutic means. It's really tied towards providers or qualified healthcare professionals. Qualified healthcare professionals, though, is not really defined. And there was a comment put out, so like CMS put a big document out asking for comments on this, and there was actually calls whether or not pharmacists could be involved with RPM. And they never really said yes or no, so it's kind of like a kind of gray area. But this is a space where I'm really, really keying in on, because I can see this being a big player for pharmacists for RPM. Because if you think about it, with all these smart devices for medication adherence to track, it kind of makes sense if you have a pharmacist that would to use those devices to monitor adherence in real time, and then from that help out with any clinical interventions. But the emphasis is going to be we have to be paid for it. If we're not being paid for it, why are we going to do it at the end of the day? Because it's going to be a lot of money and time put into it. And when it gets right down to it, most pharmacists are paid for sheer volume of medications that we can verify and put out. I mean, that's most of our profession is dedicated towards. Yes, we have clinical services we also offer, but they don't really bring the money. They're more cost-saving initiatives for clinical pharmacists at the end of the day. Next one, talking about smart pill bottles, which I had here tech. Yeah, this one called Pillsy. Pillsy actually came out with a new multivitamin cap sensor and a subscription model for it. And this I've seen. If you look at some other companies, they're really trying to partner either with a pharmacy or some kind of multivitamin company to give more of a benefit for the product service. And Pillsy has been using their smart caps basically to attach to common vials that you might get at the pharmacy that you remove, and it goes off and it reminds you to take your drug and track in real time if you took it. But now they're going for the subscription supplement service, which is, I think, rather interesting move, because I haven't really seen this too much. And I'm trying to figure out if this is going to be a big thing or not a big thing. I'm kind of not too sure, but I think it's a good pivot for them in terms of adding this onto a service, because I haven't really seen too many people do it. Next, we have AllToll. So AllToll was an old company that pivoted before that was a on-demand delivery service, and now they became almost like a pharmacy company. And I really think to compete with PillPack, you saw them do a lot of weird design changes. Like one example was they went to the multi-dose strip packaging service, trying to mimic PillPack, but they're really based in the Bay Area, but they're trying to expand beyond that. And we're seeing a bunch of other companies trying to get bigger and do that too. So whether you have Capsule or now RX, we're seeing a large amount of seed funding coming into there And AllToll, I think, is trying to break out and try to really get into this space where they can have a larger pharmacy service. And one of those is going to be, I think, delivery service coming back to it because they have a pharmacy they can base and use a lot of automation to get large volume medications out. So we'll see where that goes. Another thing that was cool is Pillow. This is a company I've been following for some time. If you listen to some of my talks in the past, I'm really fascinated by these devices. Basically, it's like if you have an Amazon Alexa and a smart and a pill dispenser had a baby, and you get a smart pill dispenser. I mean, look at this thing. It's kind of really so cute. Look at the buggly eyes and looking at you, it's going to smile. You kind of almost want to hug the damn thing, I would say, at the end of the day. But I think the big differentiator between these devices compared to other smart medication dispensers is what we're seeing is this integration of like a home service that has a holistic approach, whether it could tell you in sync with your wearable devices, like, oh, you took this many steps, so you should get out more. How can you eat better? I can also see these things be used for post-discharge monitoring action plans, whether it be for like COPD, whether it be for heart failure, things like that. I think is what we're going to see these kind of devices focused on. The big question is always going to be price. $499 for a device like this. We're going to need to see a bigger push that actually leads to outcomes for people to want to afford to pay for it. Next one is the FDA. Actually, if you weren't aware of it, had an innovation challenge going on with opioid use disorders. And they just announced some companies that actually got into it. I think there was 8 of them. And Moby Health actually covered these a little bit more in depth. So if you want to look into this, well, these companies are listed here. Moby Health at least has links out to it. You can see what they look like. So if you want to see the guy pill dispenser and such and what they're doing, I recommend giving this a good read over. Next is Tabula Rasa. So if you're in the MTM market and you're really trying to see how this stuff's getting innovated, one company is DoseMeRx. This one was an Australian-based company that provided pharmacogenomic and other pharmacokinetic testing information for dosing of medications. I've seen the product used primarily for inpatient use, such as vancomycin, aminoglycosides, and such. So Tabula Rasa actually acquiring this is relatively interesting to me because while Tabula Rasa has been pulling the whole pharmacogenomic model in terms of identifying what is great dosing or great medications to use for individualized patient therapy, in terms of pharmacokinetics and such, nor what dosing to use, I think is relatively interesting. And so I'm curious how this is going to be really put into their overall strategy in terms of using this platform within what they already have. And then if you haven't followed Tabula Rasa, they've been doing a lot of acquisitions in the past few years. Insomnia RX they acquired, for instance, which was, I think, a big leap for them as well. Next, you have ResMed. So ResMed acquired Propeller Health. So Propeller Health is a company that was basically put a smart sensor on top of an inhaler. There's a bunch of those out there. I actually have one here, for instance. This is Haley from Adherence, and Haley just launched an OTC model. So basically, this thing syncs up to a smartphone. So whenever you use an actuation, it will tell your smartphone that you actually use the dose. Propeller Health was very similar. Sensor just fit on top, and they actually got acquired by ResMed. So the big difference here is this is going to really go into like a behavioral model, trying to see how can you help out with pulmonary diseases. And ResMed's been doing a lot of stuff in this sector, so I'm not surprised they acquired Propeller Health. I think this cost $225 million. I think some people were very surprised that was that high. But I think this is actually a really good move and for a platform that's trying to really get into the sensor-based mechanics for behavioral feedback for pulmonary expectations. Next we have, which was kind of cool, this was a app and a platform that's going to help out with ketamine dosing. This is, I haven't really looked into them too crazy, but I think it's just relatively interesting because there's been a lot of people pushing use of ketamine lately for therapeutic purposes, whether it be depression, anxiety, and I just thought it was interesting that this is a team up that just happened lately. Next is what I think is some big news for pharmacy space is you have AspenRx Health. Now they got $9 million, and the new incoming president of APHA is on their advisory board. And it's supposed to stimulate a gig economy mindset for pharmacists. And I'm kind of mixed on where this is going to go. As we know, many pharmacists are looking for more hours. They're looking for more side income. Um, and I guess a gig economy mentality, such as, an Uber shift, as we've seen a lot of people adapting, trying to get in here, I guess it kind of makes sense. So pharmacy finally got into it. I mean, this isn't very different from other physicians that have been betting themselves for like on-demand pharmacy services for like providing oral birth control for some companies like Nurx, where they basically approve people and they get prescription mailed to them. But in this case, we've also seen like telehealth, like teledoc and stuff like that. So physicians have signed up for that and they get reimbursed and they get paid for it. This model, I'm going to be watching this closely because I'm very curious in terms of what kind of gig economy exists for pharmacists in terms of time put in, services provided, and really how much you're going to get paid for this. I think it's going to be the big thing. And then the laws and rules and procedures that go into it with the state boards, and I think that's going to be kind of a very gray area. So this is something I think that's really worth watching. Now, there's some products that I want to talk about, but one of the big ones that I think is really cool is smart insulin pens. And I haven't seen pictures of this stuff yet, and I've talked about it in the past. If you follow me on my podcast, we were talking about smart insulin pens coming from Novo Nordisk, and Eli Lilly was working on them. And we knew that they announced there were going to be two of them, but there was no pictures. But Diatribe, which is great for digital health and diabetes, has these two images here, and they're showing how they work and give a lot of detail in terms of what they're using for the technology in terms of how it's going to work. So if you're really in the diabetes space, if you've been questioning what this stuff is going to do functionally, this is a great read here just to see, what is this going to be at the end of the day. I think this is really worth watching. Now, some papers, as you know, that I was covering in the past. So it was a great one that came out that I liked. It was a review on interventions to improve medication adherence in JAMA. I've read this paper briefly. I have to go back and revisit and read it more in depth. But my topical overview was they did a very good search. But the question I have is what interventions you're looking at. I feel like this is a review of very traditional mechanics to improve medication adherence, whether it be one-on-one talks, whether it be remote monitoring and such, or using like things like Sure Scripts to see when people are filling and such like that. And there were some talks about smart pill bottles and some other things, but we didn't really see some discussions about these new smart sensors from inhalers. I didn't really see that in there. The other thing I didn't see mentioned was the use of bioingestible sensors, which I think that's going to be a market that's going to really get big here soon. So I didn't see that as well, but we saw things like telephone calls. In pharmacy, we do that a lot where we call patients to remind them to pick up their medications. So things like that where it's occurring. And one-on-one conversations, motivational interviewing. But I would say I think this is a good read, but I think the timeline for how relevant this paper is going to be in the next few years is going to drop significantly. So this might be at least a good step to see what is currently here. Well, we have a lot of research coming out about smart sensors and other things that's going to ratchet up here, and we'll have a new review probably within the next 3 to 5 years as these studies come out. Let's skip this one. And this was kind of cool. I saw this one is on my reading list in terms of how can you predict with machine learning. So if you follow the whole AI topic and such, I've been quite fascinated seeing how machine learning is being applied to identify different things. I have a colleague who's using different stuff to identify when people may have side effects or high risk for adverse outcomes with this stuff at his hospital. And so I've been trying to wrap my head around how we can use this technology for different clinical outcomes. So this one was basically using for schizophrenia, and it looks pretty cool. I mean, I'm not a very big expert in this area. I was more cardiology focused, and while I do have patients now in my home healthcare setting where I'm working and I've seen this stuff, I'm still kind of like, where would this fit? So the idea is really promising and very interesting to me. In terms of applicability from day-to-day functions, I think we're still a little bit away. This is an interesting paper. and I would recommend reading it if you're trying to question, like, in terms of what evidence and what studies do we need in order to say digital health works. I've come across people who want a traditional RCT. I've come across people who say real world evidence, just go with it. And this is a big problem, especially for companies that want to get their product out and adapted by payers as quick as possible to basically function. And I think this is a good read for a lot of people. This is kind of interesting. Eye tracking used to basically track use of like medications and such. So I've never really heard about this before, and I've been seeing people talk about different use of tools coming out for these things. And this actually, well, it's not directly related to it. I've seen some videos about people wanting to go like a whole Black Mirror mount where they put like contact lens that can identify people and such. So when I see eye tracking technology come and being talked about, I really get very interested in it these days. This one's really cool as well. This was continuous temperature monitoring using socks. So if you've been following digital health space with diabetes, there's a lot of talk about insulin and wellness and exercise and such. But then if we think about, what are the complications of diabetes being microvascular and macrovascular, microvascular being retinopathy, neuropathy, and nephropathy. Neuropathy, with especially with the feet care, I think it's glossed over a lot. And we've been seeing a lot of these smart socks come out, and I've seen ones with temperatures. They can detect if you may have a formation of an ulcer. So it's been growing really heavily, and we're seeing some studies coming out for them. And I think this is really cool if you're really interested in terms of where do these sensor-based socks fall in care, and what does this stuff even look like. This is a good paper to read in order to see some like the overall work that's been done in this space. If you're into reviews of mobile apps, like for me, for instance, I've been doing a lot of work with a colleague on travel medicine apps. So I like to keep up on what people are finding on different therapeutic areas. So this one is about insomnia. So I think it's pretty cool if you want to look over like what is out there in terms of insomnia and what are the apps and where they stand. So I think that's a pretty good read for you. This is something I was glossing over, but not too crazy about. I'm actually going to close this one. And that one I already mentioned, so now I'll get into some other ones. Okay, this one was kind of cool. This is published in JMIR, and this is the use of digital medication management system for effective assessment and enhancement of patient adherence to therapy. A feasibility study. Long words, but basically all this stuff is really, when you hear feasibility studies, is there's so many companies coming out with these smart medication adherence devices, and they need to show that they actually work. So you hear feasibility studies. A feasibility study does not show efficacy. So always keep that in mind. People say our device shows that improves adherence, and they cite literature. Check what it is. If it's a feasibility study, it really doesn't show clinically that it's going to improve adherence. It just shows, like, and I mean, when I say improve adherence, it means like it in a traditional mindset, like, oh, it's definitely going to do all this. From a feasibility study, it just implies, does this thing actually accomplish what we're hoping it would do? And that's usually the first step. And after that, then you come along with more clinical trials, and you may do a randomized controlled trial using your product and such. Usually a lot of these studies basically are very short in duration, small population, and they look at basically what they even thought about it. So they do like a lot of survey data. But this one was pretty interesting because you can see like this is a little drug dispensing unit. Has a mouthpiece. That's something I actually thought was really interesting about how this thing works. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like an advert discus if you think about the end of the day, like how this thing like basically works together. So I don't know what the choking hazard is with it. I haven't read it too in depth, but this was a paper that is on my list. I want to read a little more in depth just to see where it goes, because I hadn't seen anything like this before. It caught me kind of off guard. Another one that I think this is a study design paper, I should say that. But with all the push for the Apple Series 4 watch to do EKGs and to identify cardiac arrhythmias, if you've been curious about how that's going to work and how they're going to determine and study it, this is basically the study design. So if you're really into that space, give this a read in American Heart Journal. and just see what the methodology is going to be like. We'll probably see these results in the next few years when it gets published. Next is if you're curious about talking about medication adherence, especially when we talk about people who English is not their first language or may have English language deficits, this is actually relatively interesting. This is something I think that gets ignored a lot by a lot of companies, especially when we think about adherence. They kind of gloss over, I want to say, from a user interface or user design, people who English is a second language or may not be that great with, in terms of how they may use their devices and how they may use a platform. So I thought this was relatively interesting because their conclusions, you read here, you can see these findings suggest that LAP patients may be underutilizing a beneficial internet tool, basically because they just don't even know about it or they can't find it. So I think, some literature has questioned this a lot. So I'd like to see this, and this is something I would throw back to any tech companies in the adherence space, is always take this into consideration in your design. This might be a good thing to read over just to reinforce that case. Next was a kind of like a survey almost about what pharmacists thought about social media and mobile health applications. And the bottom line is they were interested in it. And I think there's people in the community that want to use this stuff for pharmacy, but the problem is always time and what to actually use. So if you're interested in terms of pharmacy surveys that you want to utilize in terms of talking about what is the uptake, I always keep my eye out for these because I like to use these as citations and presentations I have. So here's one for you. And then and here's the paper for that then. So I did have that one open. And this one's free and open access, so it's nice if you want to just grab that real quick. So that basically wraps up where I'm at in terms of things that I'm in process reading or gone over. And I want to share this with you guys because I think it's a good end of the year wrap up for just a sheer amount of stuff that just got dumped at the end of the year about all these new products and services, things that are coming out. I think 2019 is going to be a very interesting time for digital health. I think it's also a time for pharmacy to really get into it more. We're going to see a lot of products coming out. We're going to see a lot of media covering a lot of new drugs that are going to be coming out that are going to be digital health enabled. I think there's going to be a lot of questions in terms of where do we as a profession fall into play with this. So these are things to keep in mind and keep a watch out for. In any event, thanks for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this. What I'll probably end up doing is I'm going to be, if you come back to my blog, I'll have each of these things listed as links. So if you want to just grab them instead of searching for them on your own, feel free to do that. So take care and have a good day, and see you in 2019.